This week's Parsha VaYikra starts off with God calling to Moshe from the tent of meeting. VaYikra el Moshe, Vaydaber Hashem elav me'ohel mo'ed lemor. This seems to be an unusual way to start off this week's reading and new book of the Torah. For what purpose did God need to call to Moshe? The Midrash Tanchuma clarifies what happened by looking at the big picture. VaYikra might be the start of a brand new book of the Torah, but it still is coming directly after the occurrences of the previous book, Shemot. At the end of last week's Parsha, the Mishkan was fully assembled with God's presence filling the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting. This prevented anyone from approaching it, even Moshe. As such, Moshe needed a special invitation from God to allow him to come close. But why should it matter if Moshe could approach the tent of meeting or not? The Tzur Hamor says that the purpose of the Mishkan wasn't just to build a house for God, but was also there for Moshe to use as a means for speaking to God. The Yalkut Shimoni adds that as such, from God's perspective, it pained him to see Moshe left out when Moshe was supposed to come close to the tent of meeting. So God made a special call to Moshe, an invitation as it was, to enable Moshe to approach the tent of meeting and thus be able to get special instructions from God on what to tell and teach Israel. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch takes it in a very different manner and focuses on the word el, to. He notes that in general, the one who initiates a meeting or conversation is usually the one who sets the tone or agenda and tries to steer and lead it in the manner that he sees fit. As such, the Torah wanted to clarify the nature of the relationship between God and Moshe, in particular in relation to who in general initiated their conversations. By starting off the book with God as the one calling to Moshe, the Torah was intimating that whenever there were meetings that took place between them, it was almost always God who initiated their meetings, and not Moshe. We can compare and contrast God's relationship to Moshe with the other prophet, who is also considered to have reached Moshe's level of prophecy, Bilam. Unlike Moshe's relationship with God, it was Bilam who tried to initiate his meetings with God, in particular, to force his will upon God. Rav Hirsch continues and says that we see from here an answer to those people who were trying to belittle and minimize Moshe, accusing him of being arrogant. His detractors allege that Moshe was the one who initiated contact with God to influence him, while in reality, Moshe's modesty and humility prevented him from even thinking of unnecessarily approaching God. So in order to come to Moshe's defense, the Torah started off this parsha and book testifying to Moshe's sincerity and humbleness. It was God who approached Moshe to teach or pass a message on to Israel. God was the one who set the tone and not Moshe. Or perhaps the pasuk is coming to remind us of God's first call to Moshe from the burning bush. When God called him then, the life that Moshe had up until that point was no more. From then on, after accepting God's call, Moshe had a new path with a new purpose in life. His new role was to be Israel's redeemer, to take Israel out of Egypt and bring them to Mount Chorev to worship and come close to God. Moshe succeeded in his mission. He led Israel out from Egypt and brought them to Mount Chorev to worship God, gave them God's Torah, and helped them build for God a house. With the close of the previous parsha and book, however, Moshe is no longer Moshe the Redeemer. Moshe had fulfilled his original mandate, and God wanted to give him a new purpose. As such, the parsha and book starts with God calling to Moshe, calling him to his new role. Moshe now becomes Moshe the teacher and lawgiver, leading and teaching the nation in the ways of God, a role that he would have for the rest of his life. Shabbat Shalom.